Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds, the Hunter Chronicles. This evening I'm going to be talking about how I constructed a timeline chart based solely on the information in the FIT report, namely the timeline details and overview, along with a few of the other little tidbits in the FIT report, specifically some testimony. Yes, it's the 29th. Good old 29th. All right. We start out with this 24-hour time scale on the screen, on which I've not only listed all the hours, but also subdivisions for the quarter of the hours and within each 5-minute gaps for the very fine lines between the quarter hours. So let's just take the very first statement out of the timeline. At 5:43 a.m., Paddock, the FIT report would lead us to believe that Paddock stopped gambling, which he was doing continuously since the previous night. Well, the question always is, how do they know that? And how are they going to demonstrate it to us? And the FIT report is just filled with these statements which they just blindly lay out there without providing much foundation. But if we go back to footnote 10, up at the top of the timeline section, we'll see that somehow they arrived at these conclusions based upon watching security footage and reports, etc., etc. Now the time here is 5:43, and that's a very specific number, which appears to be fairly precise, and therefore we have to assume that they have some medium to support that. That's an assumption, and I would guess and speculate that that it was video of some sort. Now the implication here is that for at least 6 to 8 hours, Paddock was gambling nonstop, continuously, no breaks, no nothing, at who knows where. And given the limited number of places that we have seen him at in all other videos, might say that he was gambling at one spot. But anyway, they have him at 5:43 a.m. gambling. So let's just put that on the chart. Next, they have him eating at the sushi bar from 12:28 till 13:14. All right, there we go. We put the sushi bar on the chart there. And so you say, whoa, that's a large gap there between the gambling and the sushi. What happened? No mention of anything. Nothing whatsoever. Now, from previous videos, you probably already know that this is the time of day that Paddock likes to sleep, and it would not be unlikely that he went back to his room, but the FIT report fails to assert anything that I can tell from its reading here that places him in the room in those hours. So now that's excluding the LIR, of course. We're just basing this on the timeline. Why wouldn't LVMPD put in that, in the first statement up there, that he stopped gambling at 5:43 and returned to his room? I mean, they put it in the very next sentence about sushi. Why wouldn't they put it up there? So it leads me to believe that, there's Paddock. He stopped gambling, but he didn't go back to his room. And that can become a problem or not, depending upon what other supporting evidence or lack thereof we have. But anyway, they've got him gambling. They got him eating sushi. That's about the same time we see him eating all the time. So no mention of anywhere, no elevator trips, no mention of any room entry, blah, 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 blah. And if he had gone back to his room, of course, he would have had to have an elevator trip. But when he does, right after eating the sushi, no elevator trip. Why? Well, I guess in this case you could rationally argue that, well, since they stated he returned to his room, that was sufficient and they didn't need to either include any images or any specific time at which he rode the elevator up. All right, fine. be that way. And here I just point out a few details. Did he use a stairway? Did he use an elevator? And does this return at the end of the line up there imply that he had been in his room prior to the sushi? That's weak. I just don't think so. All right. The next statement they have is at 2 p.m. Both rooms, 32 135 and 32 134, were cleaned by hotel staff. Well, wait a minute. 2 rooms. Paddock's only got 1 room at the moment. So while they could be cleaning both, that's kind of a, you know, when they say it like that, it's kind of implying specific. Well, let's just lead on. Of course, how long did it take to clean the rooms? Yes. When they say they cleaned both rooms, and in the previous parts of both the overview and the timeline, they say that he had interactions. He stayed in the rooms, not room. Then you got to start bitching a little bit and say, well, wait a minute, he hadn't even checked into room 134 yet, and therefore he wasn't even possibly in the room 134. He was only in room 135, and therefore that statement's a little inaccurate there. Plus, it's also not likely that they cleaned both at once, because that takes more staff, and why waste extra money? And you can say, well, maybe somebody was assigned a different room. Could have been, but that hasn't been the experience on the other stuff. Other stuff meaning the other times that they cleaned the room and or prepared the room being 135. So anyway, yeah. Oddly enough, or interestingly enough, this cleaning of the rooms would be the last cleaning of the rooms to occur until the FBI decided to come in and clean up the rooms. Let's just put it that way. All right. Very importantly here is that we have multiple people cleaning multiple rooms, because they said hotel staff, it's kind of weak. But anyway, that person or persons who cleaned the rooms, and actually in one case it's preparing the room, but you could call it cleaning if you're weak-minded. There's no testimony from them, ever, in the FIT report. Oh, sure, in the overview part of this they say that Paddock interacted with staff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they interacted with these people. But whoever they did interact with, there's not testimony from them either, except in the overview where they make these assertions. Why is it that the last people to have any interaction with Paddock inside his rooms, other than the person who delivered the food at the end, there's no testimony from? That raises red flags for me, raises yellow flags for me, raises all sorts of flags for me. But yet we can include include statements from other people who are, I don't know, it would seem kind of irrelevant. But let's let this puppy roll. What's the next thing they assert? That Paddock remained in his room using his laptop as the rooms were being cleaned. All right. Now, since Paddock was already in his room and he remained there while the staff cleaned, we can kind of say, well, he was in that time, right after, from all the way from after sushi till at least when the cleaners left. Although they don't state when they left, they don't state how long it took to clean them, so that's kind of a vague thing. But let's go ahead and put over onto the chart an approximate region at which we think he was there. So in that little orange section on the left now, we can say, yep, Paddock was probably there. All right. Now, they state that he used his laptops, but yet I don't see any report elsewhere where he did any searches, blah, 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 on that date, on that time. So if he was using his laptop, as it seems he had a preponderance for doing, well, why wasn't that information carried forward from the FBI analysis, digital analysis, saying, yes, during this time he looked for, all that sort of stuff. Could have been very interesting. All right, what's the next statement they put in? All right. At 3:06 p.m., Paddock checked into room 32-134. Okay. At the VIP counter. So back downstairs we go. Let's put a little mark in our chart for this. Okay, he was downstairs at the VIP. Lovely. Now you say, wait a minute. If he went downstairs at the VIP counter, how did he get down there? Again, no mention of any elevator trips. No mention of leaving the room, blah, blah, blah. But, to save space in the report, I can see where it might be reasonable to leave out that detail. But then on the other hand, being a suspicious person on my end, I say, maybe they had to leave that out because there's somebody with him. That sort of stuff. But, to make a report credible, you don't go leaving out the details. Because if you leave out the details, why should I believe your overall statements on the big picture? If you're weak and inaccurate in the details, then there's only one conclusion I can arrive at about your overall theory. It's weak. Yep, we just talked about that. All right, what's the next thing? So at 3:08, we finally get him taking the guest elevator. In this case, he's going to take it from where he was, which was the VIP, up to the 32nd floor. Okay, well, that's a fairly secure statement. So apparently they do have a video of him taking the elevator up there. Would have been nice to have an image of it, wasn't it? Yeah, sure would have. But then again, they show very few images of Paddock. Now let's put that in there. Mark it up there. Now, you have to ask yourself this question, and we talked about it a little bit, but ask, why would they be so specific about him taking that elevator up there at that time, but not mention the elevator going down or any other time in this entire day where he obviously had multiple trips up the elevator? Or did he? Some people might argue that he didn't, and this was the only time he went up there, and that all the other stuff was done by other people. In laying out these time charts, I will be mostly focusing on the one-person Paddock-only theory, but there's certainly plenty of grist for the mill here for a multiple-person theory. And it's thanks to the intentional or entirely gross mismanagement and reporting of the LVMPD. All right. So he's up there at 15:08, and then he enters room, or somebody enters room. Oh, they say it was Paddock, 32-134. That makes sense. He just checked into 134. Or does it make sense? Hold up a minute now. It has 4 key cards now. 2 for 135, 2 for 134. How do I know that? I talked about that in one of the earlier videos. And he could have unlocked. Well, we'll get into that in a second. So here he is. He goes back upstairs, enters room 134, spends a little time there doing a couple things. Then what? What happens next? So, I say that he probably unlocks and opens the adjoining doors from the 134 side. And I say that because if he had left them unlocked, he could have entered room 135 directly, but he doesn't. If you look at the LIR, he enters 134, diddles around, and then a minute later or two, he goes into room 135. Which, if he'd had left the doors open, he would simply have entered either 134 or 135, and then used the adjoining doors to make access into the other room. So that suggests, and I know I'm bringing in LIR information here, but why didn't they mention that he entered room 135 at this time? He entered room 135 at this time. Why didn't they mention it? And so anyway, let's move on. I think you get the gist of the idea. All right. And then they tell us that he remained in his rooms for the remainder of the day. Wow. That's a long period of time. All right, so we have Paddock staying in his room from early afternoon till who knows when. They claim he didn't leave the room. That's fine. That's a long period of time, yes. Just talked about that. So what did Paddock do for all that time? Did he work on his laptop? Did he assemble his weaponry? Did he have someone up there? What did he do? And oh, by the way, how do they know he remained in his room? Let's talk about that for a little bit. We have no video of him entering his room. We have no video of him going to his room. All we know is that he last checked into the VIP, which, there should have been some images there. There should have been some images in a lot of places, but there aren't provided to us. So it's a pretty bold statement to say that he remained in his rooms without also saying alone or, whatever. And if he had been in his room alone, he could have slept. But there should have been some artifacts that led the LVMPD to say that he was there. I mean, what could he do that would not generate some external events? I mean, if he's on his laptop, then that's going to be noted in the forensic digital report. If he made a cell phone call, that would be indicated. If he called room service, that would have been indicated. Oh, and speaking of which, let's let this roll a little bit. Guess I better turn off the sound there. Because the next thing that occurs in the FIT detailed timeline is that a room service ticket is charged to his room. So here we have late in the evening, close approaching midnight, a room service ticket that's closed out, which means that he ordered some food totaling $103. It's a lot of food. I know it's pricey. Makes you wonder, but more importantly is, like all the other times that he had food delivered, we have specific times, dates, places, and people, but not on the 29th. And so you begin to ask, why does the FIT report do things differently for certain days? Now, you could argue that there were different people doing different days. That'd be great too, but then the person putting the FIT report together should have saw the inconsistency and gone back to that person and say, hey, I need a little bit more information here, because on all the other times that we have food being delivered to the room, we've got these summary testimonies in the FIT report that indicate that a person was there, they didn't see anything in the room, he was alone, nothing unusual, blah, blah, blah. But here on the 29th, we don't have anything like that, and I need that information from your interrogation reports. Because if I don't put it in, then everybody's going to say, what's going on here? And that's precisely what's happening now, because the information is not included in the FIT report, then it raises all sorts of questions, particularly when you couple it with the fact that you don't have testimony for the people that prepared room 134, the people that cleaned room 135, but you have a statement somewhere for somebody coming up to check a stink in the room. Now, I didn't mention the stink in the room here because it's part of testimony, and I'll get into that in another section or another video, but you got to have a consistent report to be believable, and these sort of minor details aren't, and therefore you don't. All right. So what else here? And down the little purple arrow there is where that thing did. Oh, yeah. And what about the refrigerator? A second refrigerator was delivered to Paddock's room. Well, this refrigerator's been bugging me for a long time because we see it in the final images, the little black thing on top of the credenza as you go through the entryway to the doors. Entryway doors to 135, it's on the left-hand side there. And on top of it is the white styrofoam cooler with the lid blown off, but it stayed on top of the refrigerator. Okay, great, fine. Talk about that too at another time. It says, this fit report says that he had this second refrigerator delivered to his room on the 29th. Now, for the life of me, I can't figure out precisely where this refrigerator was delivered. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why they didn't say specifically who delivered it and when it was delivered. So here again is another indication that we have somebody who interacted with Paddock in the room, who knows when. I kind of speculate that it's in the early morning hours. But anyway, you have this fellow in there, or person in there, plugging moving it in on a cart, putting it up on the credenza, plugging it in, open the door, making sure it doesn't stink, it's checked, and then leaving the room. So it had to have taken at least a minute or two. And during that minute or two, that person could testify what the room liked, who was in there, who wasn't in there. Again, they could say, well, there's another statement of it, nothing unusual occurred, but he doesn't. They don't report anything. They don't tell us the person, just that a second refrigerator was delivered. And it begins to become more suspicious by the moment, because not only do you not have testimony for anybody who delivered it, confirming that it was delivered, but that if you go and look at the whole story of the refrigerator, which was requested back on the day that Gamboa cleaned stuff, then you ask, why did it take so long to get the refrigerator? Why on this day? And I'll get into that in another little video. But it just adds more doubt to the whole picture. They didn't supply enough details for you and I and the reader to feel comfortable that the refrigerator was actually delivered, and by whom and for what reasons. All right. Yeah, yeah. Tell me about it. Time's not specified. Okay. So let's just wrap it up here and talk about this. And you could read the summary, and these summary statements are fairly accurate in representing what I'm trying to get across. When you take just the information from the timeline and the overview, and then dabble in a little bit of testimony from the FIT report, but we don't do a massive integration of the LIR and the images and all that. We just want to see what the FIT report says. Then there's big gaps in information. Where was he from early morning when he stopped gambling till when he appears at the sushi? What did he do for all those hours after he was up in the room late afternoon, etc., etc. And there'll be more information coming along that raises doubt here. And then we have the elevator trips. By my count and by my reckoning, had to be at least 7 elevator trips. Yet the FIT report decides to report only one. The one where he came up to his room after checking into 134. Now, to me, that says that there's something important about that time frame, that they had to report that elevator trip, or something could have been interpreted otherwise. And so it's really a sore point of focus for me, but I haven't quite figured out what that important thing was, but I'll eventually figure it out. And then we have the lack of testimony for the cleaners, who were the last people to spend significant amount of time in room 135, during the whole thing before the shooting occurred, and yet we don't have even a summary statement from those people. What's the deal? You know, it just leaves you wondering. Rather than answering questions, it leaves you wondering. Without going a lot into the Locke interrogation report, you know that every time Paddock was going in and out, and every time he had people servicing him, there were room entries. And we only have one room entry reported. And you're going, what? Yet they want you to believe that he was in his room for vast periods of time with, no trips anywhere, no guests anywhere, nothing. They want this lone wolf theory. But by reporting only one room entry where there obviously had to be multiple room entries, then they reduce the credibility of their statements overall. And that's basically what I'm trying to say in the remainder of this summary, is that you start out, you're looking at the FIT report timeline and its overview, wanting to know what happened, and by the time you're done and start looking at things critically, you're left with the distinct feeling that you're being sold a bill of goods and that there's more to the story. And so that's what I got out of this little exercise. It was a very useful exercise to chart this stuff out, because now I have the time chart to compare and contrast with all the other information that's available for the 29th, and I'll be doing that in another video. In fact, I think the very next video I'll do is integrating the testimony that was not listed in the overview or timeline, and see how it affects the timing and or the knowledge base for what we just did in this video. And so that wraps it up, and we'll catch you in the next one.